Start reading in verse 1, John chapter 10, beginning verse 1. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So Jesus again said to them, Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they might have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them in also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life, that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This charge I have received from my Father. In John 10, we have this explanation from Jesus about himself to the Pharisees. These were the same Pharisees from the last chapter who just cast out the man that was born blind, the guy who defended Jesus, and they basically called it a disciple of Jesus. And these are the same Pharisees that called up a council to pick apart the miracle of the man born blind, and they questioned every person, and they scrutinized every detail, and they continued to threaten people who would dare confess that Jesus was the Christ. So there's this tension from chapter 9 that goes into the conversation Jesus has with the Pharisees in chapter 10. The Pharisees cannot find a way to discredit Jesus. If you go back to John chapter 5, you find out that even back in John chapter 5, they were seeking for a way to destroy him. Not only when it came to murdering him, but also discrediting him when it came to what he was teaching, what he was saying. There is something about Jesus that no one could possibly question, and that was he was a powerful miracle worker. That was unquestionable, his power. He performs miracles that cannot be denied, that are established in the witness of 2 or 3, like the blind man's parents. And Jesus speaks like no one's ever spoken, like when the guards were sent to arrest him, and they said no one spoke like this man. So the people in Jerusalem listen to what Jesus says, not only because of what he says, but also because they know that he is powerful and he's a miracle worker. And everyone is in awe of Jesus. Wherever Jesus is, someone's going to listen to him. Wherever Jesus goes, someone's going to listen to him. And Jesus, at the end of chapter 9, tells the Pharisees, who were supposed to be leading the people of God, who were supposed to be those who are bringing more people to God, that your sin remains. He basically calls them blind, and that your sin remains. Because they think they have another answer besides Jesus being the Christ. They think they have another answer besides Jesus that will lead them to God. And they think they have a better way, and they figured out a better way, and then they can lead better than God, who is standing in front of them in the flesh. So there's this tension between Jesus and this audience of the Pharisees, because the Pharisees do not believe that Jesus is who he says he is. No matter how much power he shows, how many miracles he works, they have come to the conclusion that they are not going to believe in him, and anyone who does is not with them, and they're going to be cast out. So Jesus tells this parable to the Pharisees, this figure of speech, if you will, and he repeats this illustration about the sheepfold more than once, and he explains it in more than one way. And just to remind you from last week what we went over, what a sheepfold is, it was usually a stone stacked fence, right? An enclosure where the sheep would be placed during the night to protect them from harm. You have all these shepherds that are all over the place when it comes to the countryside of Judea, and they're away from home, they're grazing in different places, and they have to have a central location for all the sheep to be protected. And all these shepherds would come together, and they would build a singular sheepfold structure, and they would place their sheep there at night. And during the night, with a shepherd or a hired hand who's guarding the entrance to this sheepfold, all of the shepherds would come and call their sheep to go in, all right? And in the morning, they would all go in, the shepherds who owned sheep there or stored sheep there, and they would call their sheep, and they would come out because they would recognize their voice, and they would not be the voice of a stranger, okay? They would follow the shepherd in and out, and they would find pasture. That's the whole illustration that was given by Jesus about the sheepfold. But the Pharisees didn't know what Jesus meant whenever he was telling this particular illustration. And I'll give you an example. It's like me only telling you this. There's no context. I just walk up to you and I say, a dog returns to its vomit. Now, if I just come up to you and say that, what are you going to look like? If that's the way I start a conversation with you, what's your face going to say when I say, a dog returns to its vomit? And that's all I say. No explanation.
Kind of sickening.
Do what?
Kind of sickening.
Well, it's kind of sickening, but if I just tell you that and don't give you any context or explanation, what do you do with that? You look exactly like the Pharisees when it comes to what Jesus just said. Jesus just told them a parable, a figure of speech. And they're like, okay, what do you mean by that? Okay, we understand what a sheepfold is. We understand that sheep go in, go out, and we understand that somebody who's outside is a robber. We understand all that. What do you mean? So, it's kind of like me saying a dog returns to its vomit. Yes, it's gross, and I've seen that happen. What are you saying about it? So, what's the truth attached to it? Now, if you read the entirety of the context of that particular proverb, Proverbs 26 and verse 11, the illustration is this. A dog returns to its vomit, and then the context is attached. The meaning is attached. So is a fool who continually repeats his folly. Now, do you understand why I said a dog returns to its vomit? Yes, because it's explained by the context of what I said after that. This is the same thing Jesus is doing. He starts out with a figure of speech, and he tells a figure of speech to these Pharisees, and they look at Jesus like, what in the world are you talking about? Why are you bringing up a sheepfold and a bunch of sheep and someone who is guarding the entrance? Why are you bringing all that up? So Jesus tells the figure of speech about the sheepfold, and the Pharisees are looking at him exactly like you would look at me if all I said to you was a dog returns to its vomit. There is a connection that has to happen that has not happened yet when it comes to what Jesus is explaining and what the Pharisees are supposed to do with it and what the Pharisees are supposed to see with it. So Jesus, in verse 7, begins to explain, right? So if you want to look at it like you look at Proverbs chapter 26 and verse 11, a dog returns to its vomit. And then it's connected to the reason why. Because a fool will keep repeating its same foolishness, right? So you have this connection that happens. Oh, the light bulb goes off. So the Pharisees hadn't had the light bulb go off yet. All Jesus tells them about is the sheepfold, and the light bulb hadn't gone on yet of connection. So this is his explanation of the sheepfold metaphor. Jesus is the only door by which the sheep go in and go out. How do you know that? Because Jesus starts out by saying, I am what?
The door.
I am the door. He is the only door. The only door when it comes to the sheepfold that anyone can go in or out. He is the only door by which something dangerous and something false is kept out, and those who are supposed to be in are in. What is true is kept in. What is false is kept out. What is safe and secure is kept in. What is dangerous and alluring is kept out. So Jesus is the one who keeps out and casts out. Now think about this. Jesus is the only one who keeps out and casts out. And Jesus is the only one who allows entrance in and keeps in. Let me say that again so you go back to John chapter 9. Jesus is the only one who can cast out and keep out. Jesus is the only one who can keep in and stay in. Now, why is that something the Pharisees would be kind of raising their eyebrows at because of what they just did in John chapter 9? They just cast the former blind man out of the synagogue. They cast him out of their community. They cast him out of their presence. And they tried to cast him out of everything. And Jesus, in this particular analogy, says, you do not have the power to do that. You are not the door. Jesus says, I am the door. Now, can you imagine what the blood pressure of the Pharisees was doing about right now? You are not the door. I am the door. And by the way, that definite article we're going to talk about, I am the door. There's only one. There's not two. There's not multiple doors. There's only one. It's Jesus. I am the door by which everyone has to pass in order to get the sheepfold, or get into the sheepfold. But Jesus then calls the Pharisees thieves and robbers who only come to destroy. Because if anyone tries to come by any other means besides the door, and who's the door? Jesus. Anyone tries to come within that sheepfold besides the way of Jesus, they are thieves, robbers, or predators. Now, what did he just call the Pharisees? Thieves, robbers, and predators. This is a very exclusive statement from Jesus. Now, I know that we use this as an encouragement a lot of times because we don't understand the context and we just read it out of context. Jesus is absolutely torpedoing the Pharisees when he says all of these things. He is speaking to an audience who does not believe in him and will refuse to believe in him no matter what miracles he does and what he says. They think they are the authority on everything, and Jesus says, I am the door. You are not. If you try to put something in or take something out, you are a thief, robber, or a predator. I am the door. You are not. So these are very exclusive statements by Jesus when it comes to the audience he is speaking to, because he's speaking to Pharisees. Now, this means that entering through Jesus is the only way. Can anyone give me a connecting verse that we say all the time when it comes to I am the way? By the way, definite article there as well, that I am the way, the truth, the light, only way. You remember that? John chapter 14, verse 6, I am the way, the truth, and the light. Jesus is the only way. Same thing here. He is the only door. Jesus is the only door. Now, what that means is that entering through Jesus is the only way you get into the security and safety of the sheepfold. And there is only one way into the sheepfold, because Jesus says, I am what? I am the door. And you don't go through the door without going through Jesus. He is the door. There is no salvation without Jesus. The former blind man who was cast out was in. Now, this is what he's painting in front of these Pharisees. The former blind man that they cast out was in. And the very ones who cast him out, who did not believe in Jesus, were out. Now, you see how all this is flipping around on the Pharisees? They thought they were the door, and they thought they had the power to cast people out who they thought were not worthy of being inside.
Well, backing up before Christ got into this picture, they thought what was their contact with God at that time?
The law of Moses.
The law of Moses.
I mean, there were no prophets. Well, there were prophets, so I'll back up on that one. But the major thing they said in the last one, the conversation, was we are disciples of who? Moses. That was their thing. We follow the law of Moses. We have the law of Moses. We know the law of Moses. And now Jesus comes and says, I have come to fulfill the law. And they said, no, you haven't. We have a better way. We know better than you do. And no matter what miracles you do, we're not going to give up our power. We're not going to give up our grip. And we're not going to say that you are the Son of God. So yeah, they had the law of Moses. And they had people who, like Simeon, who prophesied about Jesus when he was born, or Anna, the prophetess, who prophesied about Jesus when he was born. They had all these different ways that they could have seen Jesus for what he truly was, the Son of God. But they refused, because in order for them to say Jesus is the Son of God, what does that do to their position? They don't have it anymore. They don't have it anymore. And we'll get into that in a minute, because Jesus really does expose the true identity of the Pharisees when it comes to this particular analogy and this figure of speech. Maybe we'll get there before we quit. That's a good comment, though. What were they following when it came to the Pharisees? What were they doing when it came to trying to follow God? And the answer was they were trying their best when it came to the law of Moses to restrict everything they could. And we go back to the Sabbath day and all the regulations and rules that they added to that, and that they imposed upon people, the traditions of men. They were power hungry when it came to everything, and their word was supposed to be the authority, and that's what they thought. And Jesus says, you're not the door. I am the door. So there's one entrance, there's one door, and all the other ways in which anyone would try to gain entrance into this sheepfold and in the security and safety of the sheepfold, anyone else who's trying to do anything is a thief, a robber, or a predator. Jesus is the only entrance, he's the only door, and it is only through him that anyone is going to be saved. And like I said, they tried to cast out the very person who went through the door. When that exposed, they themselves haven't gone through it. So this is where the illustration of Jesus hits home with me. The entrance to the sheepfold that Jesus is talking about is through the person of Jesus Christ. Let me say it again. The entrance into the sheepfold that Jesus is describing, when he says, if you enter into it, you will be saved. That is what Jesus says. The way into that sheepfold is through the person of Jesus Christ. It is not simply agreeing with his teaching. There are a lot of people in this world who agree with the philosophies and teachings of Jesus about the golden rule. That's a really good one. Helping the poor, visiting the sick. There is nothing that they find disagreeable when it comes to that information, when it comes to that teaching. They agree with the teachings of Jesus. But it's not agreement with the teaching of Jesus that gets you across the threshold of the door. If you have the instructions on how a door works, and every mechanism that is on that door, and you know every single thing about that door, let me ask you a question. Have you actually passed through it yet? No. Because there is a huge difference between believing the teaching of something and actually going through it. Just like the Pharisees knew the law of Moses, backwards and forwards. They could memorize huge chunks of the Bible when it came to the law of Moses. What they did not do is connect that to Jesus. All those things that spoke about the Messiah, the prophecy of the one who was coming to save, all those things they could tell you, they could quote it to you, but they were not going to go through that door. You see the difference between having the instruction manual in front of you and actually going through the door? Because the Pharisees had everything in front of them. They didn't go through the door.
Well, the only thing they had at that time was the prophecy that he was there somewhere and going to show up later. Is that not so?
Yeah, that Jesus was not the Messiah. The Messiah was going to come later.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
He wasn't there.
Yeah.
So they were doing their stuff the way they wanted to do it.
They said there's no way that Jesus could come from Nazareth, which he didn't. He was born in Bethlehem and all that. There's no way that the Messiah is going to do all these things. Even though he was doing all these miraculous signs and wonders right in front of them, and he was telling them exactly who he was, that he was sent from heaven, that he was the great I am. All these things were right in front of them, and they still refused to go through the door. And what Jesus says is that your door will not get anywhere that my door will.
It was prophesied that it was that's the way it would happen. So why did they not make? Why do you not believe it?
That's a really good question, but at the same time, have you ever gotten so ingrained in a rut of doing things when it comes to your entire life that someone comes along and tells you a better way and you just don't want to do it because you've been doing it the same way for so long? How many of you have ever done that before? Yeah. So you have these Jews, these Pharisees, who have been teaching the exact same thing for hundreds and hundreds of years, and now you have Jesus show up, who, yes, he's a miraculous miracle worker. He has said things and taught ways that no one's ever heard of. He has given you ample evidence that he is the Son of God. Yet, you have still latched yourself to all these things that you've kept doing, and all of these, laws you've kept doing and kept doing. And Jesus says, no, I now am the fulfillment of those things. Follow me. How hard is that going to be? Now, looking back, I can say, yeah, why in the world did you not just fall down at his feet like the former blind man and worship him and say, Lord, I believe you're the Son of Man? Well, there's a lot of baggage that goes along with changing your beliefs. Have you figured that out? When it comes to how you believe in a certain way, and someone comes along and says, well, let's look at this with fresh eyes. I'm not talking about doctrinal beliefs. I'm talking about, like having 3 songs in a prayer instead of 4 songs in a prayer, And someone comes along and challenges all the things that you've been doing for so long. How many of you would kind of, balk a little bit and have your eyebrow raised if we just changed up services and had preaching and then Lord's Supper and then had 6 songs at the end? Well, that would probably not go over well. Can you biblically tell me why? But why would it not go over well? Because what have we been doing?
Josh, that's kind of like if you're raised in the denominational world, it's so hard to even have the Bible and people tell you what the Bible says to really understand why you're going to change.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes a long time sometimes.
And it is. There are discussions that people get into that will deteriorate and boil down and finally get to the basic premise of why there's not going to be a change. You can show them book, chapter, and verse and study with them and why they're not going to change. And that is that their family has been this way, and that's how I'm going to stay. Do you know how many Pharisees would have said that? This has been in my generation. This is generation after generation of, served in the temple, and generation after generation have done this when it comes to the, tithing and all the stuff that the Pharisees did. And my dad was a Pharisee, and my great granddad was a Pharisee, and I'm going to be a Pharisee. And the same way with the Sadducees and all the sect of the Jews. And then Jesus comes along and says, I'm the fulfillment of all this, and all this is going to go away, and you follow me.
The word that applies to that then was tradition,
Oh, yeah.
and it applies to us to that same word.
Yep.
We're completely wrapped around the axle right now.
That's true. And like I said, I'm not talking about doctrine. I'm just talking about the mindset that we have that has been ingrained in us. Flip that over to the Pharisees and then multiply it by about 100. Because you know how ticky-tack the Pharisees were about everything. Can you imagine growing up in a Pharisee house? I mean, there would have been list on top of list on top of list that what you could and couldn't do and how you could and couldn't do it. And if you went this way and didn't go that way, and there were all kinds of lists that you had to do, all kinds of things that you had to do in a certain way at a certain point. Can you imagine Jesus showing up and going, follow me? Drop all that, follow me. Not everybody's going to react like Matthew, the tax collector, who just left everything in his booth and followed Jesus. Not everybody's going to react like that. So yeah, I would love to answer your question like they were just not very smart. But yeah, well, to see everything in front of you and then to say, I'm just going to push pause on Jesus and still go this direction, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But at the same time, when you factor in everything that they had, that was a lot to break away from.
Well, there are some other denominations out here today that are basically, in their minds, they're solid.
Yeah.
And a lot of they've got some things that work, and I'm not trying to condemn anybody. I'm just saying. But for them to walk over here and walk in our doors and listen to what we have to say, would not agree.
Sometimes.
Hey, is that not so?
Yeah. I mean, we talked about baptism, what was last Sunday? I mean, there's a lot of differences on the whole baptism deal. A lot of differences. So let's say that someone came in here. Let's just flip-flop it on us. Let's say Jesus showed up. Okay? Say Jesus showed up and said, you don't have to be baptized anymore. How would you take that? Well, you go to the law right here. Now, I understand there's a whole lot more variables when it comes to prophecy and all that when it comes to the Old Testament. Let's just take that example. And Jesus shows up, says that he's the Son of God, and says you don't have to be baptized anymore. How many of us would kind of balk at that? I would say that I know that there's different variations of this, but I'm just saying, put yourself in the shoes of the Pharisees. I understand that they were power hungry and they didn't want to let go of anything, but at the same time, they had a cultural ditch they had been in for a long time. And Jesus comes along and he clogs the whole thing up.
But do we not know that we have the truth?
Yes, we do.
They didn't.
No, I mean, you get Jesus in front of you, you're going to be pretty certain that this is going to be something different.
But that's what I'm saying. There's a difference there. I mean, I understand what you're saying here, but I feel like we know what we have.
Oh, I'm not saying we don't. I'm just...
But yet they didn't know, until Jesus showed up, and they had, they never given that any thought that he was going to show up one of these days,
Well, it's not just that when it comes to the Pharisees, because they would continually try to do something worse the next time. Even though Jesus tells them the truth, they would still try their best to find a way to kill him, to get him out of the way, to discredit him. Every single time, Jesus would tell them the truth, and not only would they reject it, they would try to find a way to erase it. Now that's different. Because it's not just that you reject it, it's that you want to obliterate that from anyone's memory. That's why they gave the threat in the last chapter. What was the threat in the last chapter? If any one of you confess that Jesus is the Christ, you're going to be kicked out of the synagogue. So, what conclusion did they come to about Jesus? Even though he was a miracle worker, even though he was a prophet, they did not deny that. And even though he did all these things and spoke in all these ways that no one's ever heard, what did they still want to do? They wanted to get rid of him and make sure no one else followed him, which is why Jesus says, I am the door, you are not. You're keeping people from coming in to the door that I have set up, and that door is me.
Josh, where was the temple at?
It was on the high place in Jerusalem.
Okay. Those scholars should have, they had to be older, they were smart and everything. They had to be around whenever Jesus was born.
Yes, because Herod actually called them together.
Yes, and so they had to have some knowledge that this guy called Jesus was about the age that he should have been. I mean, but in their mind, I think this was planned by God.
Well, I think it was definitely worked by God, definitely, yeah.
Because they had to know something was going on.
Well, it's just like that. We talked about this when it came to Jesus being born in Nazareth. He wasn't born in Nazareth. They had the records at the temple. He wasn't born in Nazareth. He was born in Bethlehem. But what did they constantly call Jesus?
Nazarene.
Jesus of Nazareth. Nothing good comes from Nazareth. Look at the Nazarene. They constantly called Jesus of Nazareth when he wasn't from Nazareth. Where did that come from? That's like looking at Saul and saying, that's Saul of Corinth. No, it's not. It's Saul of Tarsus.
He lived in Nazareth, but he didn't.
Yeah, when they moved, they went to Nazareth, but he was born in Bethlehem, absolutely. Bethlehem, Judea, yeah. Yep. I found that out about Gibeah, too. We're going to talk about that on Sunday, that there's more than one Gibeah, and it's like Gibeah of this, Gibeah of that, Gibeah, yeah, same way with that.
But you said they were a scholar of the Old Testament. I mean, the Old Testament talked about the coming of Christ and everything, so they knew, they had to know something.
Oh, yeah.
going on.
And then when you throw John the Baptist on top of that, when he was like the one that was Elijah, and you can't, fight with John the Baptist because he was the one that was telling you exactly what you needed to hear. You have all these different things the Pharisees would have heard. And they actually sent a delegation out to hear John the Baptist and what he was saying. And John the Baptist was saying, there's one that's coming. There's one that's coming. And as soon as Jesus came, they were still looking for a way to get rid of him. So you can tell there was a power struggle. There's something else that's going on when it comes to the Pharisees. And Jesus calls them out on it every single time. And what we're probably, hopefully, going to learn is one of the things about the Pharisees, because they are connected to the hired hands when it comes to this particular scenario, is that they love money. They love money. And the greatest way for you to get money is to keep your power. Have you ever met a politician before who didn't have anything when they started? And then later on, what do they have? A lot more than when they started. Right? So the same way when it comes to the Pharisees. The longer the Pharisees kept power, the greater the sum was when it came to what they could get out of it.
Their divisions were pretty much like political parties.
Oh, yeah.
So, and they went through 400 years of, the silent 400 years, and then here all this comes up, and they don't want it because they want to, like you said, want to keep their power, and they're not worried about God. The ones that did, like Nicodemus, he privately went. I mean, he was curious.
Yeah.
But
But
most of them were like, we're sticking to the party line.
But like you said, he went privately
Yeah.
because you knew that if you were one who was attached to Jesus, you would probably lose your position and everything else. Yeah, he'd been out.
You start unfolding that dollar portion of it, it wasn't just the tithing that they were getting ready to lose money from. They charged them to wash, to cleanse, before they worship. I mean, they were making tons of money.
Yep.
The sacrifices.
Oh, yeah, the sacrifice, yeah.
It was, and they were getting ready to lose all of it. Jesus was affecting them very, very critically.
And just like when we talked about the money changers, who, when they exchanged money, would not exchange it to a way in which would be beneficial to the one that was exchanging it, more beneficial to the person who was exchanging the money on the table. Yeah, there was all kinds of stuff that was going on.
And the money changers were having to pay they were having to pay them
Yeah.
to do business there.
So the Pharisees, in my mind, are kind of like the mafia, the mob. I mean, you did not want to cross them. You did not want to cross them. But look back for a minute at the reaction of Jesus when he claimed to be the Son of God to the blind man. When he said, I'm the Son of God, when he said, I'm standing before you, I'm the Son of Man, in John 9 verse 38. What happened when the blind man was revealed that truth about Jesus? What did he do? There's two things. He said, Lord, I believe. And then he did what? He worshiped him. Now, what did the former blind man believe about Jesus? That he was the Son of Man, that he was the Son of God, and that he was God himself because he worshiped him. Now, that's different than just agreeing that what Jesus speaks is right. Now, Google and AI might give you the right answer, but are you going to worship them? Your husband, your wife may give you the right answer about something. Are you going to worship them? You see, that's different. Me knowing what a door is and all the workings of a door is different than me going through it. Just like me, when it comes to, if someone tells me the truth, I don't worship the person who tells me the truth, unless that person is who? God, Jesus. Which is what this man did. When he heard and realized this is Jesus, the Son of Man, he said, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. So the door is Jesus to the sheepfold. He is God in the flesh. He delivers us from our sin, all of that. So this is a very important part of the illustration, but explains the Pharisees so well. We probably have to do this next week some. The Pharisees saw themselves as shepherds, all right? We talked about them as leaders a couple of weeks ago, that they were watching over the sheep of the Jews. They were the door. They were the ones that were providing safety and security. They were the guardians of the law of Moses. They were the teachers with all the right answers in chapter 9, verse 28. And they projected themselves as the model of how everyone else is supposed to live and what everyone else is supposed to be following. And they knew God's law, and they memorized the commandments, and they stood watch, and they guarded. Yet they did not know Jesus himself. Let me say it again. They had all of this going for them, yet they did not know Jesus himself. They were standing outside the sheepfold in this illustration with their daily religious ceremonies, their right doctrines, their professions of righteousness, and their achievements, but they were still outside the sheepfold because they did not enter in through Jesus. Once again, this is why it hits so far home with me, because you can agree with a lot of things that Jesus says, and you can achieve a lot of things when it comes to religious stuff, and you can be a lot of things to a lot of people when it comes to religion, but unless you go through the door of Jesus, you're still outside. I saw a quote by, I think it was, I can't remember his name. But he said that, I think it's up there, isn't it? No. Yeah, I can know every doctrine of the Bible. That's how it started, and then I wrote something else. But I can know every doctrine of the Bible, and unless I know Jesus, they will condemn me. I thought that was pretty good. Because you can know every single truth and every single doctrine in the entirety of the Bible. Unless you know Jesus, they're all condemned you. Because what's the only door that will get you into the sheepfold? It's Jesus. It is the person of Jesus. It is what the former blind man said about Jesus. You're the Son of Man. I'm going to worship you. I believe. Because if you don't have any of that, all the rest of the doctrines don't matter. Because they're not built on Jesus. And we've gone over this when it comes to baptism and confession and repentance and everything else. If you can do all those things without Jesus, those things have done you no good. So the castaway, the former blind man, he was inside the sheepfold in the illustration. He confessed Jesus, the Son of God, worshiped him. Jesus was the door that he entered through, and the unbelieving Pharisees were still outside the sheepfold because they denied the only one who had entrance. That was Jesus. So you see the balancing act here? The Pharisees in the last chapter, they said, we're going to cast you out because you say you're a disciple of Jesus. We're going to cast you out because you confess that Jesus is something that we don't think he is. We're going to cast you out. Jesus says, you're not the door. I am the door. I am the door by which if you enter in, I save you. I am the door. The Pharisees probably did not like that too much. But that's only the first part of this. We didn't even get to the second part. And I hope you kind of research this because it was really fun for me too. Because when we went over the I am statements, that I am term, where did that come from? You remember? It goes way back to the Old Testament. Moses, when he was in front of the burning bush, and God was talking to him, and Moses asked God a question: who do I tell Pharaoh sent me? And God says, tell him I am sent you. And that was the Old Testament name for God, I am. And Jesus is using that exact title in every single one of these statements. I am the light, John chapter 8 and verse 12. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. And I wish we had time to go through this, but we won't. I'll just give you a little synopsis for next week. There is what's called a definite article. I know you don't care about the grammatical stuff, but a definite article. Definite article is where the word "the" is. Now we don't care about the word "the" most of the time when it comes to the English language. Jesus says two definite articles when he says, "I am the good shepherd." Now that's interesting because when you read it in the verse in your particular translation, there's only one. There are two definite articles. I am the shepherd, the good one. And it totally changed the way I looked at this because once you see that, then the illustration that comes next it totally flows in line. I am the shepherd, the good one. Now, if you stress that you are the good one, what is there? What was that?
A bad one.
There's a bad one. Now, can you tell me where Jesus goes with this? I am the good one. You are the bad one. I am the good shepherd who will lay down his life for the sheep. You are the hired laborer who does not care for the sheep. I am the shepherd, the good one. You are not. Now, can you imagine after hearing that I am the door, you are not? Jesus goes in and says, I am the shepherd, the good one, you are not. It's just boiling over when it comes to the Pharisees. So we'll talk about that more next week.